Yes, it is campaign season, and it's so disappointing when you see the Liberal Party putting out rubbish like this. Come on, guys. Can we have some serious policy? I mean, they're putting out
No,
occasional things like this, cheaper
they've got
power.
none.
That's very light on detail. They are, talking about the increase in power prices under the ALP. That's great. But they should just be retweeting frickin' Matt Canavan, one of their own senators, who's putting out gold like this week. This is what Labor wants for Australia. Unreliable power, no future for manufacturing. Labor's all renewable strategy is a plan for the dark.
Yeah, so stacked with facts. Just what more do you need?
Spain hits first weekly of 100% renewable power on national grid. And Spain Portugal power outages live updates. These happen within days of one another. This first headline, April 22nd. This was a week
And yet Britain did the same thing and no blackout.
ago. And then a
Interesting.
week later, they have massive blackouts. Ground
They
News has
must be
got a
connected.
whole bunch of different coverage across things. And I love on Ground News, they tell you the bias of the teams, whether it's left or right. I'll put a discount code if you're interested in Ground News in the comments here. But I love the blind spot. Blackout risk made worse by net zero. Some experts claim 0% on the left are talking about the blackout risks coming from net zero.
Maybe because there are none of above and beyond transitioning any electrical grid over to another system of doing things and doing it badly. That's the risk.
Good times happening there. So what is happening? What has happened now?
It's
They're being all
non-news
cagey
apart
on the
from
details. No one
political
really wants to
puffery.
reveal the details of what's going on. They started saying it's an atmospheric event. The temperatures might have changed a little bit. We're not entirely sure.
Other possible causes. One of them is weather phenomenon. Portugal's grid operator REN initially suggested a rare atmospheric phenomenon causing induced atmospheric vibration in high voltage lines, but later retracted this claim.
What we can see here in some of these headlines, we need to know the exact causes. It should be seen as a wake-up call to the eco-zealots. Power grids need to operate with the tight parameters to remain stable. Wind and solar outputs, by contrast, vary hugely over long and short periods, so they add risk to the system. The UK's grid operators and governments should take heed, as should Australia's. Now,
Yes, this is true because they don't have the battery backup and the quick response batteries offer to take up the slack.
I choose the New Zealand Herald of all things, it's because on Ground News they said that this has high factuality. So I was like, you know what? If I'm going to bring up an article, let's bring up one that
Their
has
grid
high
isn't
factuality, because otherwise all the narcs out there will be like,
their
I
grid
can't
isn't built
believe you use
to
some right-wing
handle
media.
it.
Of course they're going to be on net zero. That's how they talk, lefties, pretty sure. So yeah,
Their grid is not set up to handle it. With 53% solar, 11% wind, and 15% nuclear and gas.
for those keeping score at home, April 22nd, Spain brags about hitting 100% renewable power. April 28th, Spain has the largest blackout in history. Michael Schellenberger calls us out. Well, renewables don't risk blackouts to the media, but they did and they do. The physics is simple, and now as blackouts in Spain strand people in elevators, jam traffic, ground flights, it's clear that too little inertia due to excess solar resulted in system collapse. What do they mean by too?
They mean that the fossil fuel technologies create inertia to create a base load because it's still a mixed grid. When one outperforms the other and they don't have the battery backup to actually deal with it, like in South Australia, they can take 30 minutes for the coal-fired power station to spin up and start producing electricity. The battery backup works for those 30 minutes while the coal power station spins up. This is why South Australia had blackouts all the time, every summer, every other summer, until that battery installation.
Too much inertia? How does that translate? Well, this is a graphic coming from Spain. Before the outage hit, Spain was running its grid with very little dispatchable spinning generation and therefore not much inertia. Solar PV 60%, wind 12, nuclear was 11.
This is a breakdown of the Spanish grid and not what was providing power at the time.
Combined cycle 982, very, very little. Now, what do they mean by inertia? What do they mean by spinning generation? What do all these terms mean? It's important to understand some basics around energy and how power grids work. Because
We know how it works. A turbine spins to produce electricity. Inertia is needed when you don't have batteries to instantly fill gaps.
smashing all these renewables in is a recipe for disaster. Our power grids have been spilt. They're essentially fancy steam engines. Whether it's coal power, gas power, nuclear
That's
power,
right.
they're essentially fancy steam engines. They heat water up, turn it into steam, run that through a turbine, it spins the turbine, that generates the power. And they need to keep them within certain parameters, like that article said. If you've got any electrical plug device, you'll know.
That's why peaker plants like gas are basically always running, even when they're not providing power to the grid. We are paying for them to stay on so that they can flip the switch and start providing power quickly.
Notice the fine print on the thing that plugs into your wall, where it's got a little certification icons. But on the back there, it will say in Australia, normally 100 to 240 volts. That means this one can work across different voltages across different countries. But in Australia, it'll be 240.
I think Dave goes sidetracked here, starts talking about how fossil fuel technology works for some reason to disprove that renewables are good.
And so while it's great that the Liberals are saying cheaper power, get to the real issue and explain to people this. That on the current net zero journey, stop talking about net zero, stop saying how renewables are actually great. Don't do that. Get out of Paris and explain that Australia is such a minuscule type part of emissions, even if man made climate change is real, even if carbon is the enemy. Australia is not the problem, and we are hurting our own people, our own national sovereign capability.
By not investing enough in renewables when we should just be making renewable investment because it is the cheapest long-term strategy now.
Our citizens with
I'm
this
guessing
net zero
Dave
madness.
doesn't agree.
It's just completely mental. Drop a comment. What do you think? Have you heard much about this Spain thing?
Let's look at what Grok says about this Spain thing. Spain doesn't have a 100% renewable grid, but was heavily reliant on renewables. What happened? Timeline. The outage began shortly after 12:30 p.m. April 28th, when Spain's grid lost 15 gigawatts of power, about 60% of its demand in seconds. This triggered a cascade, shutting down most of Spain and Portugal's electricity systems. What was the cause? The Spanish grid operator REE identified two disconnection events 1.5 seconds apart in southwestern Spain, where solar generation is significant. These led to a massive loss of renewable power, destabilizing the grid. The exact cause, whether equipment failure, human error, or external factors, remains unclear. We'll get to this. What happened? The outage began shortly after 12. What happened? The outage began shortly after 12:30 p.m. on April 28th, 2025, when Spain's grid lost 15 gigawatts of power, about 60% of its demand in seconds. This triggered a cascade, shutting down most of Spain and Portugal's electricity systems. The cause? Spanish grid operator REE identified two disconnection events 1.5 seconds apart in southwestern Spain, where solar generation is significant. These led to a massive loss of renewable power, destabilizing the grid. The exact cause, whether equipment failure, human error, or external factors, remains unclear. Contributing factor: a failure in the interconnection between Spain and France's grid likely exacerbated the issue. The peninsula, often called Electricity Island, due to the limited connections through Pyrenees. Why renewables are blamed. Spain's grid has rapidly transitioned to renewables, with 56% of electricity from renewable sources in 2024, up from 43% a decade ago, and target of 81% by 2030. So they're not after 100% renewables, so they are not even up to 81% yet. This shift sparked debate about whether renewables contributed to the failure. So they don't even know if renewables contributed to the failure. Arguments for blaming renewables. Grid inertia and stability. Renewables like solar and wind provide less inertia, the stabilizing force spinning turbines in fossil fuel or nuclear reactor plants. So this is a key element in Dave's video. It's all because they don't have inertia, which is so horrible. That's what batteries are for, to instantaneously, faster than fossil fuels, respond to differences in power levels. The problem is when you mix it with fossil fuels, which need inertia, low inertia can make grids more vulnerable to rapid frequency changes during faults, leading to cascade failures. Just like in South Australia, we fixed this with batteries. Some experts noted Spain's grid with high solar output on the day of the outage might have been less stable. Intermittency. Solar and wind depend on weather and sudden fluctuations. We know renewables are fluctuating as opposed to nuclear. Renewables were spread across many substations not designed for high volumes, so they didn't have the substation infrastructure to manage fluctuating input from such a high percentage of renewables. This is not a fault of renewables, this is a fault of substations that can't handle them and were never meant to handle them, and they have implemented renewables badly. Lack of storage. Spain has a limited energy storage, batteries or pumped hydro. Pumped hydro is just a form of a battery. You pump water up into the reservoir when you've got the power to do it, and then when you need power, you let the reservoir flow back out again, turning the turbines, which creates electricity. You're putting power in and taking power out. Nuclear phase out. The absence of nuclear plants, which provide stable baseload power, was cited as a factor, and experts suggest nuclear plants were offline during the outage, leaving the grid fully reliant on renewables at the time. So the nuclear was zero. If these experts are correct, they shut down the nuclear to a point that it could not react in time. Obviously, if they had enough batteries, obviously this wouldn't have been a problem. They could have used the nuclear base load during this renewables peak to charge batteries, which could react instantaneously, which is another element which stabilizes the grid. Official denials. REE Spanish officials, including Prime Minister Pedro and Environment Minister Sara, rejected claims that renewables caused the outage. Pedro noted the grid was handling normal demand and nuclear plants were also offline post-outage, suggesting they're no more reliable. So all these people saying, oh, well, we need nuclear because it's so reliable. The issue likely stemmed from transmission network failures, not generation. So this is the experts arguing that the issue stemmed from transmission network failures, not generation. So we're talking about stabilizing the grid, not generating enough power. Spain has long managed high wind and solar penetration with weather forecasting and grid design tailored to renewables. On the day of the outage, Spain's grid wasn't 100% renewable. Solar was 53%, with wind, nuclear, and gas contributing. This diversity should have provided some stability, undermining claims that renewables alone caused the collapse. Cyber attack. Spanish authorities initially investigated a cyber attack. Wasn't true. Portugal's grid operator initially suggested a rare atmospheric phenomenon, which we covered previously. That wasn't true. Infrastructure weakness. REE's own 2024 report warned of risks from outdated substations not designed for high renewable generation. Oh no, well, I guess renewables are a terrible technology then. It needed upgrading like load shedding, relays to handle frequency oscillations. The government plans €52 billion by 2030 to modernize the grid for renewables. So they've done all this creating renewables on the grid, but they have done nothing to actually make it stable in forms of putting in the batteries and substation upgrades that are needed. They're just asking for trouble. This is the kind of stuff that the UK does better, and Australia needs to take notice of. Power was restored to 99% of Spain and Portugal the next day, but transport disruptions lingered. A government investigation involving cybersecurity agencies is underway, with REE facing pressure to explain the outage. Spain's environment minister promised a complete audit to identify cause and prevent future failures. While renewables, intermittency, and lower inertia can pose challenges, blaming them solely for the blackout oversimplifies the issue. Spain's grid was managing a mixed energy portfolio, and failure likely stems from a combination of transmission faults, outdated infrastructure, and the peninsula's isolation from the Europeans' grid, so they couldn't get backup. The rush to politicize the outage, seen in claims from US Energy Secretary Chris Wright or Spanish political opposition, ignores the need for practical solutions like better storage, grid updates, and interconnections. Conversely, official denials risk downplaying legitimate concerns about integrating renewables without robust stabilization. The truth likely lies in the middle. Renewables aren't the villain, but Spain's grid wasn't fully equipped to handle their scale under stress. It was renewables done badly. This is not the fault of renewables. Blaming renewables as a technology is not helpful. We need more investment in renewables because that means upgrading the grid to be able to handle renewables. It means I don't even want them to stop all the coal. Trying to force BHP to make steel out of renewable energy is so stupid. We need to get the grid off coal. We need more investment in renewables. We need more investment in the infrastructure. We need more investment in batteries. We don't even have to pay for batteries. If we had enough EVs, like the US has examples of turning old EV batteries into grid scale storage, because after 10-15 years, batteries lose their capacity from 100% down to 70%. Those can be taken out and used again in grid scale storage down to 50%, 40%. The capacity doesn't matter. They don't need to be driven around. They just need to sit in a desert somewhere storing battery for the grid. So it's a whole knock-on effect. More EVs. More EVs lead to more batteries for industrial scale storage. Hit pieces about renewables failing and phrasing it as though it is a failure of the technology of renewables and not investment in the grid to make sure the renewables work only serve fossil fuel lobbyists and keep the government paying money that they don't need to pay to keep Gina Reinhart happy. I'm sure she would be very happy with Dave's video and agree with everything he said, but it's not reflecting the truth.